Good morning, everybody. What is up, or morning, night, wherever you are. Today, we're going to be talking about, when you're exploring iOS opportunities, kind of balancing the quality of life and what that means, quality of life, because that's going to mean something different for everybody. And then also, measuring that versus your compensation. Before we dive into that, I have a couple announcements I want to knock out real quick, and then I'll dive into the chat. First of all, if you're new to the live stream, the way this works is I usually talk for 10, 15 minutes or so, and then I go into Q&A. So while I'm giving my talk, if you have questions you want answered, go ahead and start asking them, and basically the questions stack up. I just go through the list one by one and just start answering away. So if you find yourself at the bottom of the list, or if you just want to support the channel, feel free to super chat, and that'll bump your question up to the top, and I'll go ahead and answer that right away. Real quick, on to the announcements that I want to get out real quick. So podcasts. I've been really big into podcasts lately. That's why the videos have fallen off. Many of you have requested that I do Swift News and these live streams in podcast form. So I'm happy to announce that you can now find me. Slide this way a little bit. You can now find my podcast, iOS Dev Discussions, basically anywhere podcasts are available. So if you want to subscribe to that, that'd be very, very helpful. What it is right now is it's just Swift News and these live streams in audio form. Again, just because a lot of people, especially on these live streams that are like an hour long, they might not want to sit in front of a computer for an hour. Totally get that. Maybe you want to listen on your commute. So every live stream and every Swift News will now be in audio form. And now I also have some interviews lined up, and I'm going to expand on the podcast. Again, got some interviews about people going from zero programming experience all the way to getting their first full-time iOS job, and all the stories and the journey along the way there. So feel free to subscribe to that. I'll be pumping out a lot more episodes there. And the other podcast announcement here is that I was on Swift by Sundell. We just recorded it Friday, and it just released yesterday. In this episode, we talk about creating content and sharing and all the benefits of that. And then we also tell our stories about how we went from freelancing to working at companies and back to freelancing and our experiences with remote work. So I really enjoyed this episode. I had a blast recording it. If you did listen to it already, I know many of you probably already have, feel free to let me know what you thought about it here in these comments, and we can kind of discuss it. Again, it's my first kind of, it's probably the biggest podcast I've done, so pretty cool there. So definitely check out that episode. And then that kind of wraps up the podcast announcements. And before I dive into catching up on the chat and into the actual topic for today, I wanted to share one more tweet that I thought was awesome. I retweeted it. Many of you responded. But that is this tweet here. And it says, "The future belongs to those who learn more skills and combine them in creative ways." Now, I know everybody here has learned or is learning iOS development, hopefully to advance their skill set. And then the idea is you combine your iOS development skills with another skill you have in creative ways, and the future is going to belong to you. So these are just wise words that I want you guys to think about, because here you are learning a very, very valuable skill, and I think that's really, really great for your future. So I just thought these were really wise words and wanted to share that real quick. All right, let's catch up on the chat here. Just the pleasantries before we dive in. So Skyscraper, what's going on? Mark, good to see you again. Haven't seen you in a while, Mark. Sankit, good to see you too. Sweet Kino, go down through here. Meyer, good morning. Yeah, Meyer, congrats on your new position. That's great. Liam, haven't seen you in a while. Awesome to see you, Liam. QD World, what's a surprise? Not sure what you're talking about. Nothing's a surprise here. Mike, hi from London. Jabal says midnight in Indonesia. That's dedication, Jabal. I really, really appreciate that. It is always tough trying to find a time for these live streams that can work for everybody in the world, so I found this is the best that I get the most, people watching. So apologies if it is inconvenient in your area, but it's really, really tough to appease every single time zone on the planet. Kimbo said, what's the topic from India? Like I just said, we're talking about quality of life versus compensation when choosing your iOS position. Kimbo says, don't forget to thumbs up. It's important for him and free for us. Appreciate that, Kimbo. Yes, it is. Go ahead and, smash that like button, as all the cool YouTubers say. All right, so let's kind of scroll down here a little bit. Alexander starting with the questions. We'll come back to that. So yeah, like I said, I'm going to talk about this quality of life compensation stuff for a little bit. I can slide back over this way. And then I'll go ahead and get into the Q&A section. So let's dive in. And the reason I wanted to talk about this topic is because it's been on my mind a lot lately because it really applies to my current situation at my startup. So a little bit of background for those that don't know, I was contracting for the past year and a half. And then at the start of July, I took a full-time position at a very, very small startup, like 4 employees. Like I'm the only non-founder employee. So super small. And so naturally, anytime you take a job at a very small startup, it's kind of unspoken that you're probably going to take a pay cut. There's a pay cut versus equity trade-off. But in my situation, there was also the pay cut versus quality of life situation. Like my quality of life is through the roof at this company. And like, I love working there. I have the freedom to do essentially whatever I want. And now that freedom comes with, like, you earn that freedom. I'm not saying I just go do anything, right? I still work my butt off. I'm well ahead of schedule on releasing the app. But like, so for example, at my previous startup, I couldn't play basketball. And those of you that know me, basketball is huge for me because I had an hour commute. I didn't get home until 7:30 and it just really killed my basketball. Whereas here, I can basically come and go as I please, make my own schedule. So that quality of life is huge. And the main point of this is that pay and compensation isn't the end all be all. And again, these are just my opinions. Let me say that everybody's life is different. You got stuff you got to take care of. Do you? This is kind of from my perspective. I feel once you hit a certain threshold of pay, and now I'm going to throw numbers out here that may seem crazy to some, but remember, these are like skewed Silicon Valley, high cost of living San Francisco numbers. So let me put out that disclaimer. But like, let's say I could be making 130K at a position, or I could be making 160K at a position. But the 130K has a much higher quality of life than the 160 or even 170K. Like, I'm going to take that 130K every single time. And again, that is because that is well above my basic minimum needs. And that number is going to be different for everybody, right? Like, I'm single with no kids, so my number is probably lower. If you have a family you're trying to support, your number is probably going to be higher. But I guess what I'm trying to say is there's diminishing returns when it comes to salary, at least in my opinion. Like, to me, there's not much of a difference between 130 and 170 that's going to affect my quality of life. Sure, I'll have some extra money in my savings account that could pay off in the future, sure. But yeah, I would much rather enjoy my job, love it, making 130 versus like being stressed, overworked, not being able to play basketball, but I'm making 170. Like, I don't know. I'm just going to take that 130. And that's kind of the whole point of this discussion. And like I said, that quality of life is going to be different for everybody. For me, it's playing basketball and having the time to work on side projects like YouTube. For you, it may be spending more time with your family. Maybe your kids are young and you got to help them get to school every day. And that's very important to you. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that, just keep that in mind, that even though you may make less money, the quality, don't forget about the quality of life is kind of the whole point of this. Some other things I wanted to talk about when it comes to like what is quality of life, something to consider. It's not just, yes, I get to have more free time or a better work-life balance, but it's also like what you're doing at work. For example, the commute. If my first startup, I had like an hour-long commute, and that commute will wear down on you. Anybody that has a commute right now will know that it takes in that situation, it took 2 hours out of my day every day just commuting, and that just wore me down after a while. But it's also like what you're working on, what type of project, and are your contributions to that project fulfilling? And that the answer to that question is going to be different for everybody. For example, for me, I love working in the stage of building the app from scratch to launch. I basically build the entire app. Whereas if you're working at a large company, you're maybe going to be more specialized into only working on one tiny section of the app. Maybe that's fulfilling for you, maybe it's not. And so you have to answer that question. And plus, what is the product? For example, the product I'm working on has a game element to it. So as somebody who grew up gaming, like, I get to build a game. Not only do I get to build a game, but I have say in like the game design, like how the level should be, how the player should progress through it. I'm basically helping design a game, and that's like super fun to me. Like, I have a blast going to work every day. So these are just things to think about. And I think I have one more thing on my list that is a big one too. And that is the quality of the code base. And that is pertinent to my situation too, because when I walked in, they already had a prototype built, and it was built by non-iOS developers who just kind of hacked together an iOS app. So it was brutal. And I had to I shouldn't say fight for it, but I had to kind of sell the idea on starting, like, completely scratching that, rebuilding. Now that you have an iOS developer in-house, let's scrap that idea, start from scratch and just like rebuild everything you just built, because I knew I could build what they built relatively quickly and there wouldn't be all that technical debt. Because as you guys may know, if you're just starting out iOS development, or you don't know iOS development very well, you're probably not going to architect the app, in a scalable manner. You may have a lot of technical debt because you just hack stuff together. So I had to kind of push to rewrite it myself to start, and it took me like 2 weeks to rewrite the whole thing that they did. But now my quality of life in working in that code base is going to be much better because I'm the only iOS developer there, than if I had to constantly deal with the headaches of all their technical debt and kind of their hack together app. Like if I was building the app on top of that bad foundation, just to put it bluntly, like my life would have been very, very frustrating, and going to work every day wouldn't have been as fun. But because I got to start clean and kind of build it my way, and I don't want to make it sound like my way is the right way, but you get what I'm saying. I don't have to deal with all this headache. So the quality of the code base is going to directly impact your day-to-day life. So make sure you check that out. And a lot of these quality of life stuff, you're not going to know until you've been working at the company for a little bit. So you can't necessarily use these data points as a decision whether to get hired, but you can use it as a decision as to whether or not, like, hey, maybe I should pursue other jobs. Maybe I should start interviewing elsewhere, or no, like I like it here. And that's kind of where I'm at now with my startup. Like I have no complaints. Like quality of life is through the roof. I get paid average. I could be getting paid more at a bigger company for sure. But again, I'm already at my minimum level. So extra money is not a big deal to me, where the quality of life is more important. So just want you to think about the trade-offs there. If you are starting to go look for jobs, or if you've been out of position and maybe you're starting to kick around the idea of starting to look for a different one. So there's the quality of life stuff. Let's dive into the questions. Let me catch up on the chat here. Take a little drink. All right, so up near the top, Alexander asks, hi, Sean. How do you schedule your time when you worked as a freelancer? Can you talk a little bit about your time management, especially when you had 2 to 3 projects? Thank you. So, Alexander, good question. The highest amount of projects I ever had at once was 4 contracts, I believe, and I don't recommend doing that. Don't get me wrong, the money was great that month, but it was brutal. So time management is tough, and it's different for everybody. But how I did it, I just basically worked 10 hours a day. Played basketball. It was basically coding and basketball. That's all I did. So social life went out the window during those periods when, like you said, I'm on multiple projects. So keep that in mind. If you are on 1 or 2 contracts and an offer for a third comes in, keep that in mind before you take on that third one. Just be like, know that, hey, I'm not going to have a life for the next 2-3 months. And if you're fine with that, cool, take it. If that's going to bother you, it's not worth it. So yeah, when I was on many projects, time management wasn't great because there was no time for anything else. David Allen says, just built my first ever app, completed today. Congrats, David. That's an awesome feeling. Total beginner, no coding background. So you're an inspiration to me, Sean, also starting in my 30s. Thank you, David. Much appreciated. And yeah, it sounds like we were in the same exact spot, just learning how to code, decided I wanted to do it, and said, let's give it a try. So best of luck, David. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or comments on the YouTube channel. Happy to help you get started and kind of guide you on your way. Because that is very, very important, I feel, for people just starting out. I'm not saying I'll be like your mentor and you can call me every day, but even just having somebody to reach out to, like, hey, what do you think I should learn next? Or, hey, do you think this is a good idea to spend, a week learning this? And, something I can answer quickly. Like, I'm happy to help and happy to help, kind of guide you and make sure you're pointed in the right direction. Jacko says hello from Finland. Appreciate you. Okay. Skyscraper says, what is a good video editor for free on macOS? iMovie. We'll do the job. I did my first probably month worth of videos on iMovie before I switched to Final Cut Pro. If you get serious about video editing, you'll realize the limitations of iMovie. But if you're just kind of like doing it as a hobby and doing it for fun on the side, iMovie is perfectly fine. Jabal says, I'm 36 and still struggle to learn iOS. Should I just stick to my current career? Jabal, that's a very personal question that I can't really answer without knowing you. I would say that if you really, really, really want to be an iOS developer and you're passionate about it, then yes, absolutely go for it, because that passion will get you through. But if you're struggling, maybe you're always procrastinating learning iOS, maybe that's a sign that you're not really that into it, and you probably shouldn't quit your career for something you're not really all that into. So I guess that'd be my answer. It depends on how into it you are. Nicola says, "Hi Sean, can you recommend some online resources for complete iOS learning?" Yeah, I'll give the same ones I always give. Again, no affiliation with Wonderlic.com. Great site. It's $20 a month to subscribe, but that's how I got my start. That's why I always recommend them, is because that's literally how I got started as an iOS developer. And then also Paul Hudson of Hacking with Swift as well. You can see links in the description of the video to the Paul Hudson books as well. He's got, I think his book is free for starter, and you'll do like 15 apps that you'll build. It's great stuff. So those are the two for sure. Toby Johnson says, "I have a good question for you." We'll see. No, just kidding. "I have a good question to you and would love to hear your answer. It's pretty much complex case, but simple question. When you get to it, may I ask, Sean?" I don't know if you want to ask it here live in the live stream. If it's complex, I probably can't answer it off the top of my head, or maybe, I don't know. But if it is more complex, go ahead and DM me on Twitter. To be fair, and this is kind of an announcement as well, if I can answer your question off the top of my head and it takes me 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to answer it 100% of the time. The only DMs or emails that I don't get back to sometimes are the ones that are like, here's all my code, here's the problem, and it's going to take me like 30 minutes just to kind of get my place in the code and figure out what's going on with the problem, and then I got to answer it and figure it out. Those are the ones that I just don't have the time to get to. So just keep that in mind if you're asking me a question. If it's a complex coding question, I may not be able to get to it, but if it's something that I can just answer off the top of my head, like, I'm going to answer pretty much all the time. Wilfred says, "Hey Sean, nice to see you live again. Appreciate you showing up, Wilfred." I'm going to butcher this. Amir Hassin, "Hey Sean, is it possible to use Stripe in-app to sell services? Under user would trust apps with their credit card info or website or meant to do payments." So I've used Stripe in a couple apps. So yeah, Stripe is perfectly fine. And there's plenty of tutorials out there on how to implement Stripe. And Stripe is a very, very well-known company. So I don't know all their security measures. I haven't looked into it, but they're a major, major company here in Silicon Valley. So I find it hard to believe that, they weren't trustworthy. Scrolling down through some questions. Antonio says, "Hey Sean, I'm glad I found your channel. Glad you found it too. Happy to help with any questions if you have any, if you're just getting started." Hi from India. Any thoughts on India? I've never been. Would like to go someday. Maybe, I know there's a lot of like Swift conferences sometimes in India. Would like to go someday. So I don't really have many thoughts. I do know I get a lot of support from India, so I'm happy about that. If my analytics, it's like US and then India is like second in viewership. So definitely appreciative there. Scrolling down here, I lost my place. Phil says, "Hey Sean, first time listening from the south of England. Love the channel." Thanks, Phil. Appreciate it. Yeah, we do these live streams every other Sunday. Like I said, I usually come up with a topic and then just the bulk of the show is Q&A. So the bulk of the show relies heavily on you showing up and asking good questions and sparking great conversation. So thank you to those that show up, and many of you show up each and every live stream, so very much appreciate that. Couldn't really do the show without you, to be honest with you. If it wasn't for that, I'd just be talking for 10 minutes and that'd be it. Ahmad says, "I would love to create a community." Go for it. Ravinda says, "Hey Sean, nice to see you live. I watched every video of you. Happy I found your channel. Glad to hear it's helpful and appreciate all the support." That's a lot of videos. That's about probably 100 or so videos. So thank you for that. Do you have any comparable information for Europe, for example, finding work? Hey Shane, I don't. I mean, I've never had to find work in Europe, so I'm really only familiar with the Silicon Valley market, which is, I understand, it's kind of its own little bubble and its own weird little place. I've never tried to find work outside of the country or even in other parts of the US. So unfortunately, I can't give any intelligent comments on this, Shane. So apologies there. Wilfried says, "Which basketball playground do you play on?" I play indoors. I always say I'm an indoor cat. I'm not an outdoor cat. It's because I'm a shooter. So like if there's wind and stuff and the balls always don't feel right when you play outdoor. So I have to play in a gym. So, and there's just a local gym here that's about 2 blocks away from my place that I play at. Dusan says, "Sean, do you consider yourself as a senior, meteor, or junior iOS developer? Also, could you recommend me some websites to find remote work for iOS? That would be awesome. Thanks." So I consider myself a mid-level developer here, and I've touched on this before. And this is always such a subjective topic, whether you're junior, mid-level, senior, and it's a very common question, like what makes each thing, and there's no one answer for it. So The reason why I consider myself mid-level is because I don't have the experience at a major big company on an established app yet. I'm planning on getting that, someday, but until I have that, because like I said, I spent most of my career building apps from scratch to the very first version 1.0. I've done that probably 8 or 9 times now. So I'm very well versed in that aspect of app development. What I don't have a lot of experience in is something like the Twitter or something like that, where the app has millions and millions of users. So every small change you make could potentially affect a lot of people, and just the whole dealing with scale. I haven't had a lot of experience with that. So until I get that experience dealing with scale, I wouldn't consider myself senior. And this is just my personal opinion. For me, it's not like 3 years you're this, 5 years you're this. It's kind of what have you done and what are your experiences. And then your second question is if you could recommend some websites to find iOS remote work. I always use my personal and professional network to find my contracts, so I never used one of those websites, so I can't really give a good recommendation. I know some people have had some success with Upwork, so check that out. And then Toptal is one of them, but Toptal's pretty tough to get into. I failed, so that was 2 years ago. But so those are 2 to check out. Oscar says, "Hi Sean, hope you're doing well. Congrats for keeping the pace to produce all the quality content." Yeah, thanks Oscar, and keep up your AR kit newsletter. I'm not gonna lie, I use that for Swift News. I check out everything you're posting there and see what I want. So keep that coming. If you're not, check out Oscar on Twitter. He does the AR Kit newsletter. If you're interested in AR Kit, definitely check that out. And then it's tough to keep the pace to produce the quality content with this full-time job. So I have to jam everything into the weekend. So pretty much my whole day today is this live stream, make one other video that'll come out later this week, and then Swift News. So basically my whole day today is creating content. Hey Ben, good to see you. It's been a while. Ben Cleary. If something is spilling over into your home life, is it time to make a change? Yeah, I mean, this is going to be different for everybody. In my opinion, yes. And when you say spilling over into your home life, I'm assuming you mean it's having a negative impact. I think your home life is arguably the most important thing. So if it's starting to negatively impact that, I would at least start exploring a change. And again, that's a very personal question that's hard to answer, but that's just my take on it. I value that into my home life. And like I said, I'm single with no kids, so it's not like I have a personal family. But if it starts affecting just my life, my happiness outside of work, that's when I start considering, exploring other options and seeing what else is out there. Vondan says, do you feel working more than 40 plus hours a week is sustainable? It's rough, not gonna lie. So it's depending on what you mean by sustainable. Like for an entire 20-year career, that's pretty rough. If you need to do it for a small stretch of like 2 or 3 months to hit a deadline, or maybe you're building up to launch, I mean, sometimes you have to do that. But yeah, not for your whole career. I wouldn't recommend that. Dusan says, what do you recommend for UI? Doing in code with auto layout? Sorry if I'm laughing at you, Dusan. Using single storyboard, multiple storyboards, or nibs. I laugh because this has now become kind of like a meme on my live stream. And Dusan, I don't recognize your name, so this might be your first time. So this is not directed at you, but this gets asked every live stream. I've made a video about it, kind of, a joke about it. So don't take it personally, but I did make a video all about storyboard versus code. I've also done a video on how I use what I call skeletal storyboards, which, to answer your question, is definitely multiple storyboards, and then they're very, very minimal. So I do a lot of the layout of the UI in code, but I still have the storyboard to structure my screen. Again, there's a video all about it on my channel. Just go to recent uploads. It came out like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So there's 2 videos for you to check out this on that'll really, really answer your question. Sorry, sometimes the chat jumps and I lose my spot. All right. Is it possible to create apps entirely by yourself? Yeah, of course, personally, Jenna. It's hard to do when you're just starting out and you're just learning. You may start off with a super, super basic app, but once you're kind of experienced, and this is why I always recommend don't do contracting or freelancing as your first job, because you are most likely going to have the entire app on you. And if you're junior and you're just starting, that's a pretty rough task. So I always recommend doing that, as like the second chapter of your career, because you're going to learn a ton. But yeah, it's certainly possible. Dusan says, do you use MVC or MVVM or Viper? Also, what is the best way to find memory leaks in the app? So I use MVC pretty much all the time. I've dabbled in MVVM a little bit. I actually like the thought behind it, having the extra view model layer. I just haven't taken the time to really build an app in it, because just MVC is just like tried and true. I've built a ton of apps in it. It's what I know. So I just go with what works. And then the best way to find memory leaks in an app, there's the visual memory debugger that just came out in Xcode 9. That is really, really helpful there. So there's videos on that as well. So just Google like visual memory debugger Xcode. You'll find some stuff there. Indateria says, hey, which path do you recommend for someone who wants to start to learn iOS dev? So I would just start just doing it on the side, slowly but surely doing tutorials. Again, the Ray Wonderlic site is great for that. It is $20 a month. Again, no affiliation. I'm not getting a kickback there. But it's well worth it. You can go through, they have a whole getting started thing, and then you'll just start building small apps. And then after you've done that initial tutorial section, start coming up with a small app idea. And one thing I want to let people just learning know is like this app doesn't have to go on the App Store. It doesn't have to be the next, Snapchat or whatever. Like it can just be something for yourself, but just build an idea that you want to see come to life, because yes, following tutorials is one thing, but you're going to find that you're just like typing what they tell you to type. And then, okay, cool, I have an app, but you don't really understand it. Like when I went from that tutorial phase to building an app I wanted, to see come to life phase, I learned a ton more because I had my ideas that I wanted to, again, see come to life, and I had to figure out how to make that happen rather than just blindly following a tutorial and having the app that they built. So yeah, that's what I would do. Hi, Sean. Any advice for a non-U.S. citizen willing to relocate to SF? Would you say it is feasible to find a sponsorship remotely, or would it be better to start with an internship? Thanks, man. So I have no idea. I've obviously never had to do this. And I've only worked at very, very small startups, and we didn't have, many outside U.S. citizens that had to get sponsorships and everything. But it's definitely possible. I mean, it's huge here. Silicon Valley definitely hires outside of the U.S. all the time. I've just never gone through the process to really give you an intelligent answer, other than the fact that it's very common, happens all the time. So that's all I know. David says, I work for Shopify and we have Stripe integrated into our POS app. Yeah, like I said, David, good. Thanks for confirming that. Stripe is huge. I wouldn't worry about their trust issues there. Yo, what's going on? Hello, dear Sean. How are you? What's new? Been a while. Just got out of the office, straight to the stream. And he's from Israel. Appreciate that, Yo. Yep, Yo's been a long time supporter, so definitely appreciate you, joining the stream. And anything you missed, if you missed the beginning, Yo, and anybody that just came in late, I announced my podcast. I have a podcast called iOS Dev Discussions. You can check that out. I'll go ahead and pull up the image here again. Just a little quick plug. So I'm going to have all my live streams and all my Swift news and other interviews and stuff I have lined up on my podcast, because many people can't make the stream, or they don't want to sit in front of the computer for an hour that the stream goes on. So you can listen to it on your commute. So feel free to check out that podcast. It's everywhere. Pretty much you can have podcasts, iOS, or, iOS podcasts, whatever. Subscribe, leave comments. That certainly helps. But definitely check that out. So you're going to be seeing Swift news and the live streams on there, and then again, more content to come, but that's what I'm starting out with, just due to time constraints. All right, plug over. All right, chat skipping around again. Samolar says, hello from Moldova. Hey, what's going on? How do I create a collection view header with a dynamic height programmatically? Nikesh, that's kind of like a tutorial that's hard to just explain in a live stream. I kind of have to show you in code, so that's a tough one to answer. Hello from Ukraine. What's going on? Is it hard to program an AR app? Conrad, is it hard is a very relative term. It is not terribly difficult if you already know iOS development, right? If you're already an iOS developer, building an AR app isn't like a huge leap. What is tricky and what has held me back from building AR stuff is the 3D modeling that you have to do, because I have no experience in building 3D models of objects. So that I say would be the tough part. So if you know somebody that can build those 3D models, or maybe you already have that skill, I would certainly jump on it. QD World says, Sean, I want to create an app like Masterclass. If you've seen this app, just take a look. And please, please, please make a tutorial on embedding videos in iOS. The video just starts playing as you scroll. So that's a good idea. I'll add that to my list. That's not currently on my insanely long list of videos. So I'll certainly add that one. Hey, from Romania, what's going on? Hi, Sean, nice channel. Quick question. How do you think we should start building our online presence with? I would start with your own personal website /portfolio/blog. And I say that's how I started, because you can almost do that in in private, if you will, right? Because nobody's going to be checking it out. But I built my own website, and you can use like the Squarespaces and the Wixes of the world, whatever. You don't have to like code your own. I coded my own just because I wanted to play with HTML, CSS, and all that stuff. But yeah, I would start there and then slowly start building your portfolio there. If you check out seanallen.co, if you want to see my website and do that, and I have my portfolio on there, and then you can attach a blog to it and then start sharing that stuff on Twitter. Definitely Twitter is huge. If you don't have a Twitter account, start a Twitter account, start interacting on Twitter. That's great. And then I think a blog is the easiest place to start. Obviously, YouTube and video is to the extreme. That's the most hard and most time consuming. Or if you like talk, podcasts are one, just definitely start sharing it. And Miguel, it sounds like if you're interested in starting building an online presence and sharing, it sounds like you want to listen to more plugs. My podcast with John Sundell that just came out yesterday, we talk all about content creation and sharing and building your online presence and how to do that. So definitely check that out. All right. Hey from Hong Kong, what's going on, Larry? Radical says, what are your long-term career plans? I think eventually I do want to be full-time YouTube content creator, building online courses, teaching people, hosting workshops. And when I say long-term career, that might be like, 5 years from now. Because again, like I mentioned earlier about being a senior developer, I want to get that stint at a large company because I want that experience of dealing with an app at scale. So once I have all that experience, I can foresee myself shifting to full-time just content creation. But we'll see. I mean, I'm very, very fluid when it comes to my career. Like I know I don't plan further than like a year out because I just know things can change so radically. I mean, 3.5 years ago, if you would have said, hey, Sean, you're going to be an iOS developer, I would have laughed in your face. That wasn't going to be a thing. And even, a year and a half ago, hey, Sean, you're going to be a YouTuber. Like, no, that wouldn't even have crossed my mind. So things are very fluid. Pravin says, what is your view on machine learning? Any article on TensorFlow, iOS app development? So I haven't dabbled in machine learning yet, so I don't really have much to say here, unfortunately. So yeah, sorry. Outside Voice says, hi, Sean, love your videos all the way from the little island of Trinidad. Thank you, appreciate that. As only 1 year into iOS development, not sure how devs research country laws before releasing apps. Thanks. Yeah, and again, this is another area I don't have experience with, Outside Voice, so sorry there. I'm assuming, I've never had to like research the laws of other countries and like how to release the apps. So apologies there, can't really help there. Hello from Belgium. Do you watch the Silicon Valley TV show? Absolutely do. It's hilarious. I watched it before I moved to Silicon Valley and it was very, very funny. But once you like move here and you're like in that world, you get so much more of the jokes and it's hilarious. It's like another level of funny once you're kind of like living this life. Wilfried says, do you often have to manually encrypt the data before storing them on platforms such as Firebase, CloudKit, Core Data User Defaults? Yeah. So I don't use Firebase, CloudKit, or Core Data. So let's just talk about user defaults. You're going to have to encrypt your data before you do that. It depends on what it is, right? If it's just an int or a string, you're not going to have to do that. But if it's, your own custom object, you are going to have to, use the codable protocol here in Swift 4. But yeah, as far as me not using Firebase, CloudKit, or Core Data is because I always have a custom backend that's built by like a backend web developer that I usually interact with. Harold says, hi, Sean, amazing channel, very concise and with a lot of passion. I have a question. As you came from a web background, what made you specialize in Swift? So Harold, appreciate the kind words. I did not come from a web background. Swift was the first language I learned. So little brief story here is I was at a startup as a growth lead, really sales, marketing type stuff, became friends with my developers and just kind of said, hey, like, what are you guys doing? And I started learning HTML and CSS. So maybe that's what you mean by a web background. That was just to kind of get my foot in the door with coding. But I've always been an Apple fanboy and knew that I wanted to build like iOS apps. So this was also at the time when Swift just came out. So I was having these thoughts and then Swift was a brand new language, just came out. So I was like, okay, well, it looks like everybody's starting from scratch with Swift. Now's a great time. And just jumped on the Swift bandwagon pretty much, from day one. Jai says, hello, I'm a beginner at iOS. Can you guide me how is there more to that sentence? If you're just starting out, again, I always say go to the Hacking with Swift, check out the links in the description, or go to raywonderlic.com. They have many, many beginner tutorials, and then you have YouTube channels like mine and many others that are more, specific type tutorials to dive into. But you can do a lot for free or very, very minimal cost before spending a ton of money. So I wouldn't recommend going out and spending a ton of money until you've done this for a few months and you know for sure, like, okay, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. Amir Hossein says, do you know about web development or Python? I do not. Do you think it is good to expand our knowledge into these areas as a mobile developer? So yeah, for sure. It's absolutely good to expand your areas into any new field pretty much when it comes to development. So for sure, the only thing I would say here is I think a lot of people sometimes spread themselves too thin, meaning they're like, I'm going to learn Swift, I'm going to learn HTML, CSS, I'm going to learn Python, I'm going to learn JavaScript. And they try and like learn all these languages at once, and they're just mediocre at all of them rather than being like really good at one of them and knowing a little bit of a lot of them. So I would just be careful about spreading yourself too thin. But if you're already been like an experienced iOS developer or mobile developer and you want to add another tool to your repertoire, for sure, absolutely. Christian says, hello, Sean. Is it worth moving to Silicon Valley? Do you have any pros and cons about working there? Greetings from Croatia. Keep up the good work. So I love it here. So yeah, there are certainly pros and cons. It's not all great. So the pros are you're here. Pretty much everything is here. So that makes it easier to find jobs and find opportunities. It makes it easier to network. However, the cons are it's very, very expensive. So you have to make sure you either have money saved up or you have a job lined up. But yeah, again, this is very personal, right? Like some people don't love big cities. I live in downtown. Like I love the city life. I love being around everything. So to me, yes, it's absolutely worth it. But again, super, super expensive. Dev says he's making $13.88 per month as an iOS dev. Pretty good. Obviously, that's going to depend on where you live in your market. Larry says, what kind of web hosting services would you recommend for iOS dev? So are you talking about like for your backend, or are you talking about for like an online presence? I'm not sure how this question is framed, but if this is for just like your backend, I'm not sure. Again, I always work with backend web developers who build the custom backend themselves, so they kind of handle all that. But there are like the Firebases of the world, the CloudKits of the world to definitely check out, but I've never used them. Jose says, hi Sean, do you use a lot of protocol-oriented programming in your projects? I do not. I've watched a lot of videos, and read a lot of articles on it. And I kind of like the way it does, like the idea behind it, but because I watched a video about how they don't have like subclasses. They just use like protocol-oriented programming. This was like 2 years ago, so maybe they've changed since then. But so yeah, it was pretty interesting, but I've never used it in my projects. Do you use RX Swift? And if you can, tell us why. Can't find a lot of resources for RX Swift. So no, I don't use RX Swift. So as you guys are probably seeing, like from these questions, do you use MVVM? Do you use protocol-oriented programming? Do you use RX Swift? Like there's all this stuff that you can possibly learn, and just due to time constraints, like it's so hard to be good and know like every single one of them, right? There's just too many, and still build like, production level apps. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's just, in the world of development, it's impossible to know everything or just be very, very experienced in everything. So Jai says, how can I strong my logical programming? Can you help me? Jai, I'm not sure what you mean. I'm assuming English is not the first language. So I'm not sure what you mean by that question. Shakti says, hey Sean, lots of love from India. Appreciate that. Thanks for the inspiration. Any suggestions about test-driven development, TDD? I'm confused onto when to write test cases. So I've never done TDD. I know what it is. I've read a book on it, but I've never actually done it. Again, that's usually, so from the world I came from in contracting, again, you have 2 to 3 months to build an app from scratch to launch. And it's just, there was, at least in the world I was in, maybe it wasn't the right world, but it was always on such a time crunch. So exploring new things and, trying out new things like that. And from what I know of test-driven development, which again is minimal, I'm not going to act like know anything, is that it's more time consuming, and you have to think things out really think things out, because you have to write your tests before you write any of your code. And again, when you're contracting, it was just like, okay, I have 2 months to get this app done. I just got to get this app done. So unfortunately, I don't have any experience there, and that's why. Nikesh says, what if I learn to make UI programmatically? Which tutorial, what resources should I follow? So I would definitely watch Brian Vong's Let's Build That App channel. He does all his tutorials building his stuff in code. So if you really, really want to learn programmatically, that is for sure the channel to go to. Again, it's called just youtube.com/let's build that app. Radical says, how do you plan to monetize your new podcast? After a while, I mean, you can just get sponsors. But you have to have the listenership, right? You have to show how many subscribers you have on your podcast. You have to show like, hey, I'm getting X amount of listens per episode, whatever. So I don't plan on doing that for a while. First of all, I got to make sure I'm going to stick with the podcast, right? And then B, it's got to make sure I get all the listenership. So probably not for 6 months to a year will I even like start messing with that. But it'll just be ad reads, just like every other podcast. Is it possible to implement SAML authentication in an iOS mobile app? Not sure. I've obviously seen SAML, but I'm not 100% sure what that means. I probably should, but again, it's live off the top of my head. Not sure. Carrie Chan says, what kind of web hosting services would you like to recommend for... Isn't that the same question? Yeah, Carrie, I just answered that for Larry Burks up there just a little bit ago. Rondi Barkis says, hello from Palestine. I'm 21, iOS developer, computer engineering student, and I'm looking for an intern at Apple next summer. Cool. How do I know if I'm ready for that, and what resources do you recommend? So internships are different. I've never done a software engineering internship, so I don't know what kind of... Obviously, an internship, I think, is probably a little different than if they were hiring you as a full-time developer. So Rondi, I'm not 100% sure how to go about getting internships. There are some YouTube channels out there, and I'm always going to recommend YouTube, that of software engineers at like Google and stuff like that are very much how to get an internship at, insert company here. And there's a ton of videos like that on YouTube. So what I would recommend for you, Roddy, is just go down that YouTube rabbit hole, just search for how to get an internship at Google or whatever, or Apple. And you're probably going to find a ton of videos that are going to have much better information than I could give you. Jose Miguel says, which blogging platform do you think is the best for iOS developer to start putting out content? So, I don't know. Medium is probably the best. That's anytime I see a Medium article, I don't know. I like the way it looks. I want to read it. I enjoy reading those articles. My platform, I just use GitHub Pages, and I code everything myself, which I wouldn't recommend doing. That's much more time consuming. So I would look into Medium for sure. Amiel says, hey, Sean, shout out from the Philippines. You're an inspiration. Appreciate that, Amiel. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Larry says, what kind of web hosting services do you recommend for iOS backend? Okay. I've answered that, and it's been asked like 3 times. Okay, dev backend. That's what he said. Okay, never mind. That was his clarification. Yeah, like I said, I work with the backend web developers. They handle all that. That's not really my forte. Amir Hossein says, I was a mechanical engineer before. Like you, I changed my job 2 years ago and am working now as a mobile developer. Do you think having a computer degree would be important in the future? So having a computer science degree is certainly helpful. I don't think it's a requirement, but it's undeniably helpful, right? So the question is if you change jobs, but you're already working as a mobile developer, so like you would go back to school just to get the computer science degree, I don't think that's necessary. I think you can do a lot just by studying the computer science like topics. There's free like Stanford and Harvard courses, and there's all kinds of like YouTube resources. So if you're already working as a mobile developer, I wouldn't go back to school to get a computer science degree. That seems backwards. But yeah, it's certainly helpful. Jake Davis says, can you code in Swift for web and app development outside of Apple? So Swift, server-side Swift is kind of starting to be a thing. It's almost ready for prime time. I know there's some big companies that are starting to use it. And I think maybe not, if you can right now, it's in its early infancy stages. I think that is kind of the plan, is because I know you can write Swift for TensorFlow at Google for like machine learning. So Swift is slowly, expanding beyond Apple, but I think it's very, very early in the game. Larry says, how do you maintain and keep that passion for iOS dev and get rid of procrastination? So I don't. I procrastinate all the time. It doesn't mean you're not passionate for it. But yeah, there are certain days when even like sometimes with Swift News, it's like it'll be 6 o'clock on Sunday night, and I'm like, I got to do Swift News. So yeah, it's hard. It's not easy. But you just got to fight through. And I think having the Swift News thing is a good example, because I know every Monday many people are just waiting for Swift News. So if I don't release the Swift News, like I'm going to hear about it. So it's kind of like that social pressure and implementing, that deadline, the social pressure of having everybody like expecting something does help make, force you to power through that, but it is tough, not going to lie. Radical says, you said that you refused a lot of contracts in the past because you didn't have the time for them. Have you thought about employing people and taking more contracts? For example, start your own outsourcing company. Yeah, I have thought about that. I even experimented with it with my Patreon community. So if you're not familiar, you can see the Patreon link down on the right. If you join my Patreon, you get access to a Slack channel, and there's a bunch of devs in that Slack channel. And I have experimented with kind of outsourcing, some work, some contracts, but it's, starting your own outsourcing company is I don't know, it's more work than I think I want to deal with. Because I want to just code. I don't want to have to deal with managing people like that when it comes to contracting anyway. So I thought about it and kind of decided not to do it. Arthur says, bro, I started learning iOS. Can I go as a junior after 1 month studying iOS? Probably not. I mean, anything's possible. You could find a company that's willing to take a chance on you and willing to help you learn, but I think that's the unlikely outcome. Again, anything's possible. If you see my video, it took me 7 months to go from starting learning to getting hired at my first job, and I think that is pretty fast, just to like set your expectations. So I would say anywhere from 6 months to a year and a half is probably the expected range of like when you can like start to get your first junior job. But again, everybody's different. It depends on your market. And again, sometimes you just got to get lucky and have somebody take a chance on you. A lot of people are saying, it'll take more times than that. Victor says, what skills should I learn to get a job as an iOS developer? I've made 3 simple apps on the App Store, no backend or anything. So yeah, networking is a huge thing. Being able to make a call, a network call to an API, get the JSON back, parse the JSON, and display that parse data in like a table view or a collection view. That's a very common thing in iOS development, and that's one skill you should definitely learn. And then other than that, it's just, I'm not saying that's the only skill you should learn, but other than that, I would start looking at apps that very, very common app features like a camera or map kit, and just start getting good at that. But yeah, those are kind of some 3 basic ones. But everybody always asks for this. Let me know the list of skills I need to know to get an iOS job. And that's just, it's almost impossible to give. But if you do want some like core concepts that you need to know, check out my channel. I have a playlist called Swift Interview Tips. And it's basically a playlist of basically all the common questions you're going to get asked in an interview. And it's stuff like memory management, classes versus structs, optionals, stuff like that. So go through that playlist, and that'll give you a good idea of what you're going to get asked in an interview. Matt says, hey, Sean, me and my friend are working on an app. He's a UX designer. How hard do you think implementing his animations will be? I've never done animating in single view applications. So, well, this all depends on his animations, right? This is the thing, you kind of have to reel in your designer sometimes. Sometimes as a designer, we'll hand you a design and there's just, it's everywhere. So programming is all about trade-offs. It's like, yes, I can build all these animations, but that's going to take so much development time and so much, time and resources. Is it worth it? Right? So you constantly have to ask, like, is this animation worth the development time? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no, this is just fluff to make it look cool. And remember, software is never done. You can always come back to it. We're actually dealing with that in my app right now, whereas we're building, charts to show like some data. And right now we're just starting with basic charts, and like our designer has all these ideas for like how the chart should scroll and animate and move as you're moving the chart. And it's like, cool, that's a great idea, but we got to get this app out. So the idea is like, let's start with this basic chart that still looks good. And then, version 1.1 or version 1.2, we can focus on making our charts better. So remember, software is never done. So I would start with basic animations, and then you can implement all the crazier ones and make it look better in future releases. So what happens a lot of times is feature creep is what it's called. Is people don't want to release an app until it's perfect, and they keep, okay, let's add this, and you just end up never releasing the app. So if you're not familiar with the term minimal viable product, or MVP, definitely look into that. And basically the idea there, just to summarize it real quick, is just put out the minimum viable product, what the word says, and then you just build on it and iterate on it based on feedback. So that was kind of a long-winded answer, but it really depends on how complex his animations are. But I wouldn't spend a ridiculous amount of time just for cool-looking fluff animations in the beginning. Harold says, do you recommend using Sketch or Photoshop? Sketch, 100%. Photoshop, to me, Photoshop wasn't built for prototyping like user interfaces, right? It was built for editing photos. So there's a lot of bloat there and clutter, stuff you don't need. Whereas Sketch is very streamlined. It was built specifically for user interfaces, so definitely Sketch, 100%. Reza says, I have an interview. What suggestions for me? Go through my Swift interview tips playlist on my channel, and you'll have probably about 2 hours worth of video content of me answering that question for you. Samar says, thoughts on Difference Kit? Never heard of it. Check it out if you don't know what it is. All right, I'll check it out. Garamon, what's going on? Good to see you. Okay, answering that question. Jake Davis, do you think that in the future there will be one dominant coding language? Never thought about that. That's interesting. Probably not, just because of the way programmers are. You know, everybody's going to try to come up with something better. So yeah, I'm mentioning this off the top of my head because I've never even thought about this, but that would be my answer is I think no, just due to the human nature of programmers, right? Somebody's going to build something and then somebody's going to say, I can do that better. And they're going to try to build their own better thing. So I would say no for that reason, even if, you know, maybe it would be better for the industry to have maybe not one dominant language, but maybe just a smaller number of them. Because right now there's a ton. So anyway, yeah. All right, only got a couple questions left. We're gonna do them rapid fire. There's only 3 or 4 left. So if you have any last second questions, go ahead and get them in, but kind of make it so I can answer them quickly. We are coming up on the 1 hour mark, which is usually when I wrap this up. So get the last second questions in. If not, we'll just answer these last few and call it a day. All right, so Robert says, if you were going to upgrade your LG widescreen, what monitor would you choose? So the bad thing about the widescreens is that they're not, 4K or 5K yet. I think that's coming. There might be even one out right now, but if it's out right now, it's brand new, so it's to the point where it's like insanely expensive, and you just wait a year or two and it'll come down. But if I were to upgrade, I have the 34 LG curved widescreen. Excuse me. I would upgrade to the 38 if I were to upgrade it, mainly because that has USB-C. The 34-inch I have is just HDMI. Sorry. But I wouldn't, if I already had the 34, I wouldn't upgrade to the 38 because I would wait for the 4K. Because that was the downside of that monitor, was the resolution wasn't high. So for video editing and photo editing, it's kind of annoying. For programming, it's perfectly fine. But yeah, I do obviously a lot of video editing. So Samar says Sketch or XD. Yeah, so that is a good point. So Adobe, who makes Photoshop, came out with XD, which is kind of their answer to Sketch, because they know, like I said, Photoshop wasn't built for designing UI. So they came out with a much more streamlined, stripped down version called Adobe XD. It's still brand new, so it's not like they're still building on it, but that is something to check out as well. I've never used it. I just use Sketch. Abraham says, hi Sean, are you still making videos on the advanced Swift book? It is on my to-do list. Yes, I'm not going to leave that playlist just done. However, and I've had this conversation on Twitter. Right now with this full-time job, I'm still trying to figure out the scheduling of it. Making the more advanced tutorials is just more time consuming. So with the minimal time, my tutorials have skewed towards easier, and that's just because it's less time for me to make. And so basically my trade-off is like, okay, do I still make, 2 tutorials a week, but they're more simple? Or do I make, 1 tutorial every 2 weeks, but it's more advanced? And the trade-off I think about is the market for beginner or easier tutorials is very, very big. And as you get more advanced, like the market gets narrower and narrower. So it's like, okay, just the return on investment of my time is if I can make more and more beginner type tutorials, that's going to reach a broader market. That's a better, return on investment on my time, rather than spending a lot of time on an advanced tutorial that has a narrower market. So that's just where my head is at as to why that playlist has taken a back seat. However, I don't like leaving things unfinished. I am like halfway through the book. So I will for sure get back to it. It's just a matter of when. So if there's ever some downtime I have, I'll probably just go nuts and just knock out the entire book just to be done with it. But I do want to finish that series. I do enjoy that series, and a lot of people have asked for it. So Matt says, MVP, yes, thank you. That helped out a lot. So yeah, there you go. Shakar says, what is expected compensation for senior iOS developer? So Shakar, this totally depends on where you live. Again, like I say, because cost of living in Silicon Valley is ridiculous, the salaries are also often inflated. Whereas, again, some other country, maybe the cost of living is very, very low, so you don't have to make as much salary. So this is almost an impossible question to answer without knowing your market. And even then, like if you were to say, India or wherever, I don't know that market. For Silicon Valley, I mean, they can make anywhere from 150 to 200K. And again, that's just salary. Then you got things like stock options, bonuses. I mean, it can really vary wildly. Nicola says, I can't read that language. Cool. Right, Wonderlic versus Bootcamp. So if I had to do it all over again, if you guys know my past, I did a Bootcamp and got hired out of that. The only thing about the Bootcamp is I do think it carries like some weight, like, oh, he did a Bootcamp, so they know what you did. They know you spent 2 months learning nothing but iOS development for 10 hours a day. So that does carry some weight. Whereas if you said, I just watched online tutorials for 6 months, they don't know how hard you worked, but they know if you graduated a Bootcamp, they know you worked hard. So even though that's not like real test of your skills, I think that does carry weight. But if I were to do it all over again, kind of ignoring that, I think I would have learned more in a faster amount of time by just doing online tutorials and learning at my own pace. So it's kind of a weird conundrum to be in. Because like I said, if you go somewhere and you just say, yeah, I just watched a bunch of online tutorials, they might not take you as seriously, even though you may know more. So it's kind of a weird thing. What are your expectations about new Apple devices in September of 2018? So we're going to get new versions of the iPhone X. Yes, it's the X. And there's 3 different sizes. I think it's like 6.1. I don't know the numbers, but there's like 3 different sizes. One of them is not going to be an OLED screen. It's going to be an LCD screen. And new iPads are going to be like bezel-less with no notch. We pretty much know everything that's going to be announced, all the leaks. Bibin says, would like to see more advanced Swift stuff. Advanced stuff which really applicable to in live projects. Yes, Bibin, I agree. It's like I said, they're just more time consuming and time is very precious right now. All right, getting to the end of the list, going to go quickly. Any thoughts on Magic Leap, ARKit, and AR in general? So yeah, I've said this before, but I'm huge on AR. I think AR is going to be a thing. It is going to take off. However, it's not going to be when you have to hold your phone up and look through your phone. Like, it's not going to take off as long as you have to do that. Once you get glasses or even well into the future, contact lenses, that's when AR is going to like really be awesome and really be a thing. So I know Magic Leap just released kind of like their first headset. It's big and clunky, but as you guys know with technology, it starts off big and clunky and then we'll get smaller and smaller and look better and better. So we're at the very, very, very early stages of it, but yeah, I'm super pumped as to like where it's going to go. So, all right, that pretty much wraps up the question list. Thank you guys for showing up. Again, check out the podcast. I was on Swift by Sundell or mine, iOS Dev Discussions. A subscribe there really, really helps. And just listen to it, check it out. And I'll be back, or you'll see me tomorrow with Swift News, and then 2 Sundays from now on the next live stream. Thanks for showing up, everybody. See you next time.